Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to the third week of the AASHTO Committee on Environment and Sustainability's annual meeting. I'm Melissa Savage with AASHTO, and in a minute, I will turn it over to Gail Davino with the Georgia DOT and Chair of the Cultural Resources Subcommittee of the Committee on Environment and Sustainability to kick us off. But before I do that, I'd like to run through some housekeeping announcements. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank our premier sponsors for their generous support of this meeting: AECOM, Bentley, HNTV, Jacobs, and WSP. For the housekeeping items, all attendees are currently muted. And we have over 450 registered attendees. So given the large audience, we have muted everyone's lines and encourage you to ask questions at any time by entering them into the questions box located on your control panel on the right side of your screen. We do have the ability to unmute your lines, but again, given the size of the audience today, the best way to participate and ask questions will be through the questions box. And the graphic on the right-hand side of your screen here highlights the mute and unmute feature, as well as the button that you can use to raise your hand. If your control panel disappears, the best way to get it back is to click on the orange arrow there next to the min-max orange arrow. If you have dialed in by phone, you need to make sure that you enter your audio pin, which can be found in that highlighted red circle there. So that you have the ability to be muted and unmuted. And again, to enter questions, the questions box can be found right there under the questions tab. And we will be monitoring those over the course of today's event. And we'll be sending the questions along to the panelists. For today's agenda, I will let Gail give you a better overview. And remember that we'll be meeting next Thursday, as well as Thursday, October 29th. So before we get started, I would like to again thank our generous sponsors for their support of this meeting, the premier sponsors, AECOM, Bentley, HNTV, Jacobs, WSP, and our capital sponsors for this event, American Concrete Pipe Association and HDR. So with that, I will turn it over to Gail Davino, the chair of the Cultural Resources Subcommittee. Gail?
Well, hello, everyone. As Melissa said, I'm Gail Davino with the Georgia DOT, and I've had the great honor and great pleasure of chairing this amazing subcommittee. And, you know, you're in for two really great panel discussions this afternoon on engaging tribes during project development and also on a research product that came out of our subcommittee on workhorse bridges in historic districts. Before turning it over, I just wanted to go through a few thank yous. First, to all the amazing cultural resource staff from around the country. You do amazing work in balancing our transportation needs with our cultural resources. So thank you for everything you do. A huge thanks to Rhonda, Carolyn, and Tony for pulling together these two panels, and of course to our panelists. We're looking forward to what you have to share this afternoon. And finally, to the AASHTO staff, Melissa, Bud, Phil, and Phil. You've given amazing support and guidance on pulling together this virtual meeting, you know, both the organization, the mechanics, the logistics. While I'm sorry we aren't all together this year and look forward to when we can all be together, it's exciting to be able to engage so many folks through a virtual platform. So thank you for all you've done to pull this meeting together, and thanks for all the support you offer the subcommittee throughout the year. So Rhonda, all yours.
All righty. So on behalf of Carrollton Holthoff at Oregon DOT and myself, I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon on for our panel, Engaging All Nations. This panel really exemplifies the synergy between the Committee on Environment and Sustainability and AASHTO's Tribal Liaisons Community of Practice. The Community of Practice is heading into our 3rd year of existence, and I think it's gotten even stronger and more vibrant than ever. We've certainly had an uptick in participation during our current coronavirus crisis. I don't know if it's because more folks are sitting at home or working from home and able to join us away from the distractions of their daily jobs, but it's been really great having everyone join in on our calls and now our Zooms. Today's speakers partner with some of the over 500 tribal nations, villages, tribal towns, and Native Hawaiian organizations nationwide. These governments represent populations from almost 800,000 members to as few as 8 citizens. Each one of these Native nations has its own history, culture, language, and religious beliefs. And while tribal nations may share many things in common with each other, including challenging historical relationships with state and federal governments, we do well to recognize the uniqueness of each tribe and their inherent sovereignty. How each state DOT engages with these nations varies widely across the country, and exploring these partnerships from a nationwide perspective provides us with the opportunity to see just how robust and diverse our approaches to tribal partnerships are. Each of our panelists today is going to give us a brief glimpse at some aspect of the important work that they do with their tribal partners within the context of state-tribal relationships. First, we'll hear from Jody Brown and Sarah Allred in California on early coordination with tribes. Heather Mustonen will then take the lead on engaging with non-resident tribes in the state of Georgia. Huai from Hawaii's DOT will discuss Native Hawaiian organizations, which are not tribes, but the consultation mirrors tribal consultation in many ways. Brennan Dolan of Iowa will give us an overview of tribal summits, while Jeannie Borchert of North Dakota will talk about virtual meetings during the coronavirus crisis. Jason Watkins, with the assistance of Erica Schneider, will discuss the importance of relationships in tribal consultation, followed by Carolyn Holtoff and some of the TIPOs that she works with in the state of Oregon. And finally, we have Laura Cruzada talking about Tribal Texas Native Voices of Vision. It's a jam-packed program this afternoon. Everyone's going to get about 10 minutes, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers before our break. So with that, I will turn it over to Jody and Sarah.
Okay, thank you very much. Depending on your time zone, good afternoon or good morning to everyone. I'm Jody Brown, Headquarters Cultural Studies Office Chief at the California Department of Transportation in Sacramento, and with me is Sarah Allred, who is the Native American Cultural Studies Branch Chief within the Cultural Studies Office. We are very pleased to be here and look forward to presenting and hearing how different DOTs engage with their tribal partners. Today, Sarah and I are going to review some of Caltrans' efforts to implement early engagement with tribes. Next slide. As you know, California is a geographically large state. The department comprises 12 districts that serve various regions of the state, and the headquarters office that focuses on programs and policies in compliance with state and federal laws and regulations, acts as FHWA as part of our Section 106 programmatic agreement, and provides support, guidance, and training to the districts. Statewide, there are approximately 100 cultural resource specialists in the department, and this includes prehistoric and historical archaeologists, architectural historians, and ethnographers. In terms of tribal engagement and consultation, there is a designated Native American coordinator in each district that serves as the point of contact for tribes for that region regarding cultural resource issues during project delivery. The statewide Native American coordinator, my colleague, Sarah Allred, conducts statewide tribal engagement, works on statewide programs and policies, and provides support, guidance, and training to the districts on all matters related to the tribal outreach and consultation that the department performs as part of the cultural resources investigation process during project delivery. Next slide. California is pretty diverse in terms of Native American ethno-linguistic areas. Of the approximately 300 indigenous languages spoken in North America, nearly 90 are in California. Currently, there are about 110 federally recognized tribes and nearly 80 non-federal or state tribes in California. Caltrans is one of the largest sponsors of archaeological studies conducted in the state due to its compliance with state and federal regulations in transportation project delivery. This work translates into many consultations between California tribes and Caltrans Cultural Resources staff in carrying out our department's project delivery efforts and complying with environmental laws, statutes, and regulations. I'm going to hand over the rest of the presentation to Sarah. Thank you.
Make sure people can hear me. Thank you, Jody. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Jody did a really good job of setting the stage for our program in California. And so I just wanted to talk about some of the primary concerns that we hear from our tribal partners during project delivery and why early engagement in these issues can really improve later project delivery processes. So among the fundamental concerns that we hear from our tribal partners is the importance of the sense of place. And during project delivery, there is always a preference for cultural resources and landscapes to remain intact and undisturbed. As we know, the historic preservation laws, namely Section 106, that require tribal outreach and consultation and that drive our cultural resource investigations are not triggered until there's a program-funded project. So while Section 106 process is rigorous and provides robust consultation during project delivery, the ability to avoid resources or address larger landscape level issues is more limited at this later stage of transportation project development. So there's a tendency in this context for resources to be treated individually on a project-by-project basis. But this case-by-case approach tends to be cumulative, leading to a sort of death by a million cuts outcome when it comes to cultural sites and landscapes. So these project delivery phase consultations and cultural resource studies do not necessarily provide for preservation planning or landscape level considerations of important tribal cultural areas. Oops, I need to go back there. So FHWA's Planning Environmental Linkages Initiative provides a great framework for addressing these issues. If you're not familiar with PEL, we encourage you to check out FHWA's website, which is a wealth of information. But in its most basic terms, the concept of PEL is investing in efforts upfront during planning phases to benefit from more effective and efficient project delivery processes later on. So front-loading the process instead of back-loading. And as you may know, PEL applies to all environmental and community considerations, but our focus here is to try to apply it specifically to tribal historic preservation issues. So since the initiation of PEL in 2005, there have been a number of reports and studies that have addressed the early consideration of historic preservation concerns during planning phases. And I've listed a few here that we have relied on and that have been helpful in guiding our efforts. But overall, they offer some key guidance and best practices that include proactive early engagement with tribes and other stakeholders on key concerns, the development of formal interagency procedures such as PAs or MOUs, consultation protocols, and the examination of planning areas at different scales using a variety of tools, of which GIS technology is identified as a very key element. So these efforts aren't limited to one particular point on the planning process, but rather there are multiple opportunities to apply these practices at various stages along the spectrum of the planning process. So in terms of Caltrans efforts and what we've been working on, I'm sure it varies among DOTs, but at Caltrans, our planning and environmental divisions have been completely separate. So in applying these efforts, we've had to forge better communications with our own planning counterparts And part of this has included working with our planning division to provide training for transportation planners on tribal historic preservation issues. We have also worked with our planning counterparts to ensure that cultural resource considerations or checkpoints are included in planning guidance documents and scoping processes so that planners are prompted to consider tribal cultural issues and know where to seek assistance. We also have statewide cultural resources inventory in our Caltrans Cultural Resources database, as well as geoarchaeological sensitivity models in many of our districts. So these have been extremely beneficial for project delivery as well as for planning and scoping efforts. So they're kind of dual purpose. And then in terms of formal interagency procedures, we've had our Section 106 programmatic agreement in place since 2007. And the PA has been extremely beneficial for streamlining our Section 106 processes during project delivery. So the upfront investment in developing the PA has paid off in greater efficiencies in the process, not specific to tribal historic preservation issues though. As I mentioned earlier, consultation with tribes on cultural resource concerns is often initiated with the Section 106 process during project delivery. And so we've really been encouraging our districts in the spirit of HEL to hold regular coordination meetings with tribes outside of the project delivery process. And we've had great success and relationship building as a result of these efforts. And then lastly, we have formed a statewide cultural studies subcommittee to support ongoing engagement with tribal cultural leaders and elders from throughout the state. We've only just formed this statewide committee. We're excited about it, but we received a great deal of interest from the tribes in participating, and we look forward to reporting back on those efforts perhaps at a later date. And the benefits of all these early planning efforts are numerous in terms of streamlining and improving the project delivery process, which is the intent of planning environmental linkages. But I just wanted to emphasize the last two bullets: better historic preservation outcomes and strengthened diplomatic relations. So at Caltrans, we're only beginning to implement these Pell practices for cultural, but we see lots of opportunities for working with our tribal partners to promote better tribal historic preservation and address larger cultural landscape issues. And it's worth noting that many tribal historic preservation values are compatible and in line with environmental conservation and climate resilience goals. So there are possibilities for cross-sector collaborations on potential advanced mitigation efforts to kind of layer conservation of both natural and cultural resources for mutual benefits. So tying these values to mitigation of transportation impacts has the potential to foster more meaningful and effective mitigation outcomes. And so we look forward to exploring these ideas further. And I always like to tell people that I feel like it's my good fortune and good luck that my degree in anthropology led me to a career in transportation. I really think that the intersection of transportation, land use, and the environment pose lots of challenges, but opportunities for working with their tribal partners. So again, we look forward to exploring these ideas further. And thank you all very much. Here's our contact information if you have any questions or advice for us. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. This is Melissa, and I just want to let everyone know that our plan is to post the recording of this webinar to the committee's website, and along with PowerPoint presentations that people have granted us the okay to post. So just so everyone didn't feel like they had to rush to jot all that information down. All right, Heather, you're all set.
All right, hello everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to participate in today's panel. Today I'm going to talk to you about consulting with non-resident tribes and sort of what we do here in Georgia. And I should say, my name is Heather Mistonen. I'm an archaeology team leader and tribal liaison at GDOT. All right, so in Georgia, we have 20 federally recognized tribes with ancestral homelands in Georgia that we consult with, quite a different number than California, but we have no resident tribes within the state. The tribes that we consult with are located throughout the Southeast or in 8 different states. And you'll see on the right-hand side there is a map that we use to track areas of interest throughout the state for tribes as part of our consultation efforts. And GDOT has a very robust work program. Just a bit of a snapshot where we have over 1,000 active projects at any given time of various complexity and degree, stage in the process. And just from January to October, we've transmitted over 530 documents for tribal consultation. So that's a tremendous amount of consultation. So what I'm going to talk about today might seem like small sort of efforts in consultation, but I think they add up given the size of the program and trying to make sure we're efficient. So really, the consultation at GDOT is the tale of 2 programs. We have a federal aid program and a state aid program combined are a total of about $3 billion annually. And so that's quite a bit of consultation, you could imagine. So for our federal aid program, we're consulting with tribes under Section 106 in coordination with Federal Highway as the lead federal agency. GDOT conducts day-to-day consultation activities on behalf of Federal Highway with the tribes, and that's a relationship that's developed over 20 years between the tribes and GDOT and Federal Highway together. And then on the other token, we have the state aid program, which is much more new. Georgia passed a Transportation Funding Act in 2015, which had an influx of transportation funding. And so as part of that, we've been working to develop a new process for what that looks like. So we consult with tribes as GDOT under our state environmental law, the JEPA. And then we also consult under Section 106, but under state aid that is in coordination with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Savannah District, when a federal permit is required for impacts to waters. And a complicating factor of that is that the U.S. Army Corps may take jurisdiction over an entire GDOT project, or they may only take jurisdiction over a part of that project. And so working out what consultation looks like when you have a mix of consultation from a state agency with the tribes versus through Section 106 in coordination with the lead federal agency. And so that relationship is newer. We've been developing it starting since 2016 and was recently formalized in a programmatic agreement signed in last December. And I'll reiterate what Sarah mentioned, is that work going into that programmatic agreement really pays dividends in the end when we are looking at project level consultation. So that 2019 PA is really the first PA with both Federal Highway and the U.S. Army Corps as signatories. That also includes non-resident tribes as invited signatories and concurring parties. So we had a series of tribal consultation and development of the PA throughout the process, and we have 3 invited signatory tribes and 1 concurring party on that agreement. So just to talk a little bit about facilitating tribal reviews, I mentioned we have quite a large work program. And so part of what we try to do is establish a consistent and efficient set of communication. And, consultation is not just document transmittal, it's building those relationships. And we found that part of that, building that relationship, is making sure that we have consistent information that's being sent and that we're helping to facilitate reviews on a project level as much as we can. So we set up expectations on document type, stage of coordination, and who the lead federal agency is, so that each tribe can sort of get information based on their preferences. And then we use a series of templates to make sure that information is going out consistently. And just some of those small things I mentioned that we try to do to help, we are one agency in one state, and we know we have tribes have very limited resources, and it may just be one person who's coordinating across multiple states and multiple agencies per state. And so how can we best facilitate that for them? And so we always include project coordinates. We include a Google Earth pin of the project location, things to help the review of an undertaking go faster. We also provide information from the Georgia Archaeological Site files for the tribes who may or may not have access. but we do also facilitate access to that database in coordination with Federal Highway. And then we also try to take what we learned from the tribes in one coordination, one programmatic consultation or project level consultation, and carry that forward with our consultant community in future work. This is an example of our consultation protocol matrix to show sort of how we organize it. You'll see that each tribe across the top here are different documents. And so that they kind of coordinate from the earliest stages of Section 106 through assessment of effects mitigation. So what are the tribal preferences based on what they get and how they get it? And then you'll see that there are some differences there with different lead agencies. So just some additional thoughts on efforts that we take to try to assist in tribal reviews and really have improve that coordination and consultation, and in turn develop relationships and trust is not just sending a document and waiting for a response, but we know of different resources throughout the state in different areas that have high tribal concern or different resource types. So we will do additional follow-up to make sure that tribes have an opportunity to consult and to have a discussion on projects where we know we have that. And so in addition to our normal transmittals, we'll reach out and we set up webinars. Now, we're all very accustomed to webinars now and virtual meetings, but GDOT's been doing this for quite a number of years and have found it a really helpful tool to engage with those non-resident tribes and to get folks together in a room and have a conversation when we might not be able to have that meeting in person. So we've been using that for years and it's found it very helpful in coordination with our other consultation efforts to provide a venue for conversation and to hear tribal concerns and work through issues on a project level as well as programmatic issues. And then just another note, we've used it a couple times in the past for folks sort of virtual site visits using videos that we then sort of show at a meeting and have a discussion. And we had several data recovery projects that were underway when the COVID hit. And so we weren't able to have tribal participation in the field work as anticipated. And so we used a video to supplement that. We are trying to facilitate more tribal monitoring and participation in field work in Georgia on these efforts. So we're building that into contracts. We're including it as part of our mitigation, our MOAs, to again, sort of have that more in our face-to-face consultation and involvement in their homelands. And you'll probably hear this quite a bit today, but face-to-face consultation has been critical to relationship building. And part of what GDOT has done on that effort is starting in 2011, having every two to 3 years, having an intertribal meeting where the tribes come to Georgia, or we've gone to Oklahoma as well, and have an intertribal meeting where we talk about programmatic issues and ideas. And so that helps to not just focus on the project level, but talk about larger issues throughout the state and concerns. And that helps to build relationships and trust. Staff gets to meet representatives and you start building that rapport. Then we've also found conferences such as To Bridge the Gap conference and archaeological conferences as a useful way to also develop those relationships. In 2016, GDOT facilitated in coordination with our intertribal meeting, having tribal participation at the Southeast Archaeological Conference. And from there, to sort of have that engagement with archaeologists and tribes and have more of an information sharing. And since then, the tribes have participated and even hosted sessions at conferences since then. So it's been a beneficial relationship building. And just real quick, I wanted to give an example of one of those programmatic efforts that came out of our intertribal meetings, where you're not just coordinating on a project level, but you're hearing what tribal concerns are and you're considering sort of what you can do in the state. And we have developed a traveling exhibit outside of a project, specific project and outside of mitigation to sort of use data recovery, past data recovery at GDOT to do outreach to tribal communities in their locations. And so this exhibit was developed to be able to be customized by each tribe that hosted it. And so that's an opportunity to engage with tribes in a different way and access to their homelands and information and archaeological resources within their homelands without traveling to Georgia. So in wrapping up, just a few thoughts on consulting with non-resident tribes. We've found that consistency in communication and documentation has been critical to building those relationships. It facilitates reviews as much as possible. We make sure we raise red flags and are responsive to tribal concerns, but then also sort of have those larger programmatic efforts and conversations with tribes to be able to get feedback and look at the larger program. And that helps to establish and maintain those relationships, which in turn builds that trust, both with the tribes as well as with the federal agencies that we are consulting on behalf of in coordination with our PA. So that was a quick rundown of a lot of things, so I just wanted to say thank you, and my contact information is there, and again, appreciate you all joining today.
Thanks, Heather. Next up, we have Pua. I'm going to make you presenter. Here you go.
All right, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. Aloha, I'm Pua Ayu. I'm a planner with the Hawaii DOT, and I'm going to talk about consulting with Native Hawaiians. I'm going to take a large overview. And again, like everyone else, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this. I'm really excited to be on it and learning a lot of great things. So because I've got to go really fast, I've tried to make my picture speak for me. So this is the Hokulea coming home from her Malama Honua voyage, where she went almost more than halfway around the world, actually. And traditionally, canoes all come out to greet a canoe that's coming home. So this is a gathering of all our canoes. And I put the picture here because I want us to remember that there are other ways to think about transportation other than roads.
Hey, Pua, this is Melissa. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't think you've let us view your screen yet. We're not seeing pictures.
Oh,
yet.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
There now? Okay,
Yep.
I'm sorry. So again, this is the Hokulea. She's coming home, and it's just to make us think that there's other ways than roads to think about travel. Now I'm having a problem going to my next slide. There we go. So as was said before, Hawaii has no tribes. So we consult with Native Hawaiians. Are you guys seeing all the weird things in the middle of my screen? No, just me. Okay, good.
Just doing the slides. Yeah.
Let me back up. Sorry. I need to back up. There we go. Okay. I need to way back up. We have no tribe, so we consult with Native Hawaiian organizations. Those are the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, civic clubs, family groups, sovereignty groups, groups with a specific interest in a land area or a particular parcel of land. So I don't want to pretend that we know everything about consulting with Native Hawaiians either. Hawaii is still learning how to consult with Native Hawaiians, and we haven't, and Hawaiians are still learning how to consult with us. So as an example, this is H3, which is one of the most expensive highways in the world. And it was built in, it was finished in the 1990s, and we're still finishing up the mitigation on this. And it's, one of the things we've learned is that you need to really specify what people are expecting and what we're expecting we're supposed to do. This was a really broadly written MOA, and so a lot of negotiations are still going on about what exactly the MOA said. Oops, sorry, I'm having trouble controlling my. Okay, some of the main issues for Native Hawaiians when consulting with DOT is understanding the magnitude of, is that the DOT doesn't understand the magnitude of the loss. As was mentioned before, there's a lot of historic angst. These relationships carry a lot of historic angst. And so a road is part of a much larger loss of land and its resources and access to the land. then I think we think about, and ironically, when a road is built, we're thinking that that's going to provide more access. But for Native peoples who cross the land in different ways, that access is being cut off. And when you cut off that access, even if you're not using it, for gathering goods or gathering stuff for hula or anything like that, you lose the possibility of transferring that knowledge to the next generation. And that's probably one of the things that hurts the most, is that the next generation therefore can't learn about these traditions. So this road is the Queen Ka'ahumanu Highway. It is the mother of all projects. We made the most mistakes on this road. That every single mistake that we could make, we made it. So it's a good learning experience. But it crossed, the original road was built before NEPA, and it crossed 20 what are called Mauka to Makai trails. They go from the mountains to the sea. Hawaiians had villages in the mountains that they went to in the winter, and villages at the sea that they went to in the summer to collect those resources of those places. And this road cut access to those trails off. So I think HDOT has a hard time understanding what the road means to Native Hawaiians. And it's not that Hawaiians necessarily need the access, it's just sort of a systemic lack of understanding about what these resources mean to them. And then the other thing is that a feeling that the road and associated development doesn't benefit NHOs, but that it benefits tourists and people who once were tourists and now have become residents. Oops. So issues for DOT when consulting with Native Hawaiians is basically how to manage expectations. And the expectation that the mitigation will address past highway projects. So like on the Queen Ka'ahumanu Highway that I just showed you, that the expectation was that DOT would at least connect one of the trails, which is not necessarily an extravagant ask, but that didn't happen. It's also that the mitigation will address past wrongs, and those past wrongs can range from historical wrongs, such as the overthrow of the kingdom, to wrongs where a DOT official may have been rude to somebody in the past, and that wrong is being carried forward into a consultation that we're doing today. And the other issue is that mitigation will address sovereignty issues. So if the United States ever decides to address sovereignty issues of Hawaiians, it's probably not FHWA that's going to be the agency that addresses it first. So it's the wrong agency to talk to. So those can be things that make the consultation somewhat difficult. And then the other issue is understanding what is commensurate to effect, because if you're looking at a large systematic loss versus a highway widening, DOT and Native Hawaiians have a very different understanding of what the effect is. And so coming to an understanding of what's commensurate to the effect is also, we normally start at very different points in our understanding of that. The other thing that becomes that has come up recently, and I think some other people have already talked about it, are traditional cultural properties. And landscape planning would be a really excellent way to address this. Hawaii has many potential eligible traditional cultural properties. If you're a land-based culture, then most of your land is a traditional cultural property. And one of the questions is, what is the effect of a road widening if the road already exists? So this area that you're looking at is Wailua on Kauai, and it has 4 heiau, which are national landmarks. It has 1 royal complex. It has one of only 2 birthing stones in Hawaii. It has many, many storied places. It has a bell stone. It's loaded with historical and cultural features. And yet it's also, and it's used to this day by Native Hawaiians. All of the places are well recognized, and people can still practice at those places. So it's a place in use. but it's also one of the most populated areas on the island of Kauai. So when we had to widen Kuhio Highway, which is down at the shoreline, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's down at the shoreline like all of our belt roads. We had to go past the Royal Complex and past several heiau. And the consulting parties wanted us to look at the heiau and see if there was a way to connect them. But when we looked at that, there's not, the heiau were never connected to begin with. There were always various land uses between them. And so, and now even today, there's various land uses between them. So it was going to be very hard to connect them. In addition, some of them are across the river from each other. Some of them are across the river mouth from each other, across roads from each other. So when we finally looked at it, we decided that we'll add the river into the nomination, so that, because the river is really what connects everything and is the major source of life in Hawaiians. They say ola kabai, water is life. So it's the major source of the life and the wealth of this valley. And so putting the river into the nomination makes sense. One of the other questions is, what's the effect of a road widening to a traditional culture area if the road already exists? So in Hawaii, the answer is going to be, well, more tourists, because most of our road widenings are because tourists are there and not necessarily because of the increased population. There are drainage issues, which in this case were a serious condition for Native Hawaiians, because several of the fish ponds were actually above the road from the ocean and had been cut off by the original road. So one of the questions was, could they get drainage back? And then there are more non-permeable surfaces, which affects the ocean quality, especially if you're a surfer, that's going to be a problem. And noise. So noise for Native Hawaiians is really different than noise for the feds, because the feds have a federal minimum of what's going to damage your ears, whereas if you're doing a cultural practice that requires no noise, for Hawaiians that was really serious. If a baby cried, or if a chicken crowed, or a dog barked, they were dead if they made noise during some of these ceremonies. So the idea of no noise is very serious, and having cars go by is problematic. So noise is also something that we're a little far apart upon. And then how do you measure effect to traditional culture? I've already mentioned this. Okay. And so our goals looking into the future are to have better relationships with Native Hawaiian people, to better understand Native Hawaiian history, and to have better tools to address these issues, such as context-sensitive design, such as some of the tools that have already been talked about, and such as better training. And one of the things that's been very interesting is that DOT doesn't have a good understanding of in another section of Hawaii, we have actually really strong traditional cultural rights laws, and there's a whole lineage of lawsuits and law cases that have defined that. So we'll start to add that as well into our training. So hopefully going forward, we'll be doing better, because we need to pass on much better relationships to our children. And so this is Laiana Wong and his son. They're both native speakers. And that's it. I look forward to questions.
Thanks, Pua. All right, Brennan, you're up next. I'm making you presenter.
Well, good afternoon and good morning to all the AASHTO folks. If you're joining today as kind of a dipping your toe in the pool, so to speak, in terms of cultural work, you're getting a great cross section. Our organizers have done a great job today presenting you a cross section. And I have to say, our monthly phone calls are just as fascinating as the in-depth cultural information you guys are getting today. So I hope you're enjoying it. Under the concept of engaging all nations, one of the things or one of the ways that we look to do that at the Iowa DOT is through our tribal summits. And we hosted our first tribal summit in 2001. So we thought 20 years of practice, this was probably a good item to share with the AASHTO group today. with regard to how we engage sovereign tribes and nations. So I've got just a couple of takeaways for you today, and I'll kind of walk through some of the basics of our summit. But before I leave this slide, if you're like me, you're a little nostalgic these days for gatherings and get-togethers where you actually get to shake folks' hands and sit next to each other. This is what we kind of call our class photo from our 2017 Tribal Summit. We're actually on schedule to host one this fall, and obviously due to the global health concerns, that wasn't possible. But what I'm going to cover today, basically, in a nutshell, is what is a tribal summit, why do we do them, and what is the benefit? So what is a tribal summit? In a nutshell, we host these events. Typically, it's 2 days worth of meetings spread over 3 days. Most years we start at noon on the first day. We've got a full day on the second day, and then a half day on the final day. You can see here we have hosted the last couple times with one of our in-state tribes, the Meskwaki Nation. And basically, it's a time for us to get together and talk through all kinds of project-related issues, tribal concerns, you name it, from stuff that might be pretty small to things that overarch over top of our program. And as much as we do that kind of discussion, it's really a time for us to get to know each other. So how do we go about developing each summit? We do start with a planning committee. The planning committee is balanced between agency staff and tribal planning committee members. We do send out formal invites. We do offer to support travel for up to 2 representatives to come to Iowa. A lot of the tribes we work with are non-resident. We've got a few tribes who have trust land in Iowa, and as I mentioned, the Meskwakis is our resident tribe. But we really, it's important for us to complete this outreach formally and informally. So we get the committee together, we kind of rough out an agenda. We always make sure to leave time for things that might pop up that we're not planning on, but might be a hot topic. And every summit I've been to, there's always something that kind of develops a couple weeks before, we're set to host that really needs some attention, that we've got to spend some time on. But as I mentioned, the summits are really about being face-to-face, and that's my first takeaway today. There's really no substitute for setting time aside, being face-to-face. Anyone who's ever been to any kind of conference over a couple days knows that 2 days worth of meetings set over 3 days is quite a bit of time inside, so we try to mix it up. Maybe a field review. Over the last couple of summits, we've tried to host some after hours extracurricular type of activities too. But at its heart, it really is about discussion and listening. And so we share equal time with agency folks and tribal folks, and we really try to balance the agenda in terms of where there's concerns and what needs to be talked about. Why do we have them? This is a really telling photo from a pretty impactful project where we were doing some bank stabilization work. This river was eroding toward the highway, and we didn't really have much in terms of options for design, and we had to stabilize the bank and the highway. And there was a massive late prehistoric site here. So this photo actually memorializes a reburial event. We dealt with a number of human remains as a result of this project, and all of these folks were major partners in the project development and in the consultation, and they absolutely wanted to be a part of that reburial event. So why do we have tribal summits? One of the main reasons that we set time aside to host these events is so that we can have project and program level discussions. Whether that's an emergency repair project or how we go about working through the emergency repair process, to large corridors, to smaller projects like a bank stabilization. We're no different than other DOTs. We've got a fairly robust program. We consult anywhere from 400 to 600 projects a year. And it's really important for us to communicate to our tribal partners what that program looks like, where we feel like we have increased risk to impact a cultural resource or a place of religious or cultural significance, and where some streamlining might be found in some of those projects that tend to have less risk. So one of the reasons we host tribal summits is because it's really important to set time aside to have program level discussions. The other things we talk about, as you might imagine, relate to identification and evaluation efforts. We're always looking to make our consultation more effective, whether that's formal or informal. We're talking about issues like partner surveys and how we can better spend our time together, how we can work together to identify resources, all the way to things like curation and what's the best way to do that. Are we taking advantage of the material culture that we collect and getting the most out of it in terms of education? I think it was Georgia's program, Heather mentioned earlier, they're out of the shed and onto the thought process outreach effort. We have very similar discussions, and it's really important part of the tribal summit effort is that we talk about the program from start to finish. The other thing that's important component of our tribal summits is, while agencies are charged to consider their effects, oftentimes consultation is more than effects for the tribes that we work with. So we talk about mitigation, we talk about preservation. When you think of a program, on an average year, maybe 500 projects, on balance, there's going to be a lot of instances where we can work to provide a preservation solution. And so that is definitely one of the main components of our tribal summit, is making sure folks know that preservation is a conversation point that we have. And I think that goes a long way with one of the other main components today, and that is building relationships and partnerships. Obviously anything that receives support from Federal Highway Administration, Federal Highways there as a main partner for us in the state. We work with our state archaeologist office a lot. Obviously, your SHPO and our SHPO are a big part of our consultation efforts. But in the context of working with sovereign tribes and nations, here's just a few of the folks who were on this year's planning committee, and just a small example of what it really takes to have an event like a tribal summit and really give important substance to the time that we choose to spend together. So what's the benefit as an agency? I want to take a little bit of time and break down this photo. This is from our 2017 summit. As I mentioned, we really strive to have some important kind of after hours events. And what this was a community meal sponsored by our host nation. And so working from left to right, the gentleman in the blue shirt and the dark glasses is Larry. He's an executive with the Meskwaki Nation. Then the fellow in the overalls and the blue hat is Lance. He's one of our TIPOs. Behind him, in the black shirt with the white polka dots, is Sarah. Sarah is one of our historians at our SHPO office. Behind Sarah is Christy. She's one of our local systems engineers. There's a handful of other attendees back there that I can't exactly make out, but working back from left to right, Laura in the blue shirt with the white lanyard there is another SHPO staffer. And then the fellow on the far right with the Route 66 shirt and the baseball hat is Al. And Al is our main 404 permit reviewer with the Rock Island District, who issues the vast majority of the 404 permits we work under. So the reason I threw this slide in particular, for all of you folks who manage maybe T&E and water resources and cultural resources, at some point we all kind of synthesize under the NEPA umbrella. For those folks who kind of sit at the heart of those interactions, think of the efficiencies and the benefits that come from having all these folks sitting around a table, sharing a meal, having talked about your program and what they find value in and what's important to them, at the end of the day, sit all those folks down, share a meal, and we've really seen just a tremendous amount of relationship building from hosting these kinds of events. Again, no substitute for setting that kind of time aside. So, main points for the day, as I mentioned, no substitute for being face-to-face. It is really key to set time aside for program level discussions. Having relationships in place is critical. You've heard that already today. I'm certain you're going to hear that again. And then, as I mentioned, agencies are charged with considering their effects, but for the most part, for tribes and all sovereign nations, consultation is often more about those effects. And I think one of the key lessons we've learned over the years is it is important to have a discussion about preservation on occasion. So I want to thank you for attending. I want to thank our organizers, and Melissa, I will turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Brennan. All right, Jeannie, I'm going to make you a panelist.
Okay. I'm going to try to get my screen up here. I'm assuming you can see me and hear me.
So can you go to display settings there at the middle part of your, yep, and swap presenter?
Got it.
There you go.
Thank you. So my name is Jeannie Borchert, and I work for the North Dakota Department of Transportation. I've been working there for over 25 years. I really appreciated the presentations I've heard so far today, and so many things really ring true. The importance of not only talking about projects, but programs and overall tribal issues. One of the things that have come up over my time working with tribes has been their concern about stone feature sites, and we've spent many days talking about that. And the fact that we sometimes have issues in understanding language that we're using and in understanding those perspectives, which can be so different. We come from different places and are looking at things differently. So the DOT and Federal Highway in North Dakota, before COVID-19, in 1998, when the new regulations were finalized for the 1992 amendments to the National Historic Preservation Act, we really began a different way of consulting with tribes, and we went out and talked to tribes. We started with the 5 tribes that have in-state boundaries. Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Sisseton, Wahpeton, Oyate, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara Nation, Spirit Lake Tribe, and Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. We gradually expanded that. We were working on a Highway 2 project, and an elder from Standing Rock, Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara said, well, you need to talk to Port Peck and the Crow. And the Crow said, well, you need to bring in Northern Cheyenne. So then we were really solidly working with 8 tribes. So in 2004, we began writing a programmatic agreement together. And it took us a couple of years, but in 2006, we were all pretty much satisfied, and we had a signing celebration at the Heritage Center in November. And we had a late edition of Lower Sioux joined us, so we had 9 tribes participating. In 2007, we hosted 4 meetings. In 2008 to present, we host 2 meetings a year. First week in April, and the week of United Tribes Powwow in September. And we're now consulting with 16 regional tribes. So what do we provide at those meetings? We host the meeting. We provide them, our tribal participants, with hotel rooms, meeting room. We serve breakfast and lunch in the meeting rooms. We pay them for mileage and per diem. Also a consultation fee. We set up the agenda and consultation with the THPOs, and we provide usually a big, probably 3-inch binder with information for every meeting. And we have had, of course, field trips Usually our meetings are 3 days in length, and the first day we really focus on projects. The second day maybe on major projects and major issues, and the third day whatever other things we need to talk about, which might include we've been working on a Section 106 manual that tells the tribes and our archaeological partners just what we do to bring tribes into the process. Right now, I think it's over 100 pages long. I'm hoping to finalize it maybe at our next meeting, but there's a lot of different things that come up and that we work on, but we also share with agency partners. We've had FAA in particular present at our meetings, National Park Service, BLM, when things have come up. So we provide some opportunity for other people to participate on our final day. And in the last couple of years, we've had a private firm, Nextera, who has paid to have a half a day on the last day. And that was at the suggestion of the tribes because they've been working closely with them. So in April, we had no meeting because of COVID. We talked about maybe trying to do something over the summer. Well, then I started talking with THPOs and everybody was extremely restricted in travel. And so we talked about doing something virtually, and our management, DOT management, was all for that. They did not want to host any face-to-face meeting with the kind of COVID cases that we were having and vulnerable populations. And so I planned a September virtual TCC meeting and decided to use the Microsoft Teams platform. One thing I can say is, unfortunately, the cultural staff was not really extremely familiar with the with the platform. We had just gotten it to use in March, and we had no training. So we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants. Some of the advantages we saw is that, you can see 9 people at once. We can share our files, which would be our virtual binder. We can easily record the meeting, and we can create a separate channel for Tribal Caucus. Now, the disadvantages really to doing this were communicating the team concept and acceptance, particularly with elders. We were told by one of the people we consult with that we really need to consider language, and that some of the elders were not getting it at all. They number one, did not or were unfamiliar with the technology, but also they speak English as a second language. And so we really need to think about how we're communicating. And again, I talked about our deficiencies in not understanding some of the parameters of Teams that would have been good to know up front. We planned to have one pre-meeting test, but we ended up having 8 of them, and we managed to get most everybody connected so they could participate in the meeting. But what we didn't understand until way too late is that most of them had not accepted in a way that made it possible for them to use the files. Because when we created the team, Microsoft Teams sends out an email to everybody, and they need to accept that and follow the procedures and create connection. And most of them didn't do that. They did not. We didn't know that would happen, and we didn't prepare them for it. And so most of them did not do that. The other thing is, many of our tribal partners didn't have cameras. And so, but we did have them participate, verbally with audio. So participation, some days we started out with 1, 2, 3 tribes. All in all, we had 12 tribes participate, which is pretty good considering. One of the other cautionary things with teams is once the meeting is over, you can't go back and learn who participated. So you have to save all of that before everybody closes out of the meeting. The meeting took less time than our face-to-face. We planned for 4 mornings, and it worked out pretty well. My management thought we might only need 3, but we did use all 4 mornings. Interesting results. We had some really clear direction. I think not necessarily due to a lack of participation, but maybe some more succinct communication, less wandering off topic. As the moderator of this meeting, I found it much less exhausting than our face-to-face meetings. And I decided that this format, I wouldn't want to use it in place of our face-to-face meetings unless we have to. But it may work really well for between face-to-face meeting issues when I need to get with the THPOs. I think that we'll use this quite often. But we're going to try to get them to join a new TCC team when everybody knows that they have to join the email that comes from Microsoft Teams. And that I also, we've had a lot of trouble in how do we transmit files. So we've used our managed file transfer system. I've sent people disks and some drives. We've handed things out at meetings. But if we can get all the THPO offices to join the TCC team, it'll be really easy to transmit files. All anybody would have to do is add a file to the TCC team, and we would all have it. So I'm hoping we can make that work because it will make it easier for them to review draft reports, for us to send maps and other things that are difficult to send through email. The tribal perspective, I got some communication back from the tribes. They all believe that the virtual format is less, of course, than the face-to-face. They talked about the importance really of the breaks and their ability to communicate with each other about issues that we've talked about and other things that are coming up on the agenda, to have that camaraderie, which I think is really what has created our family that we have, really that we all feel. And I think that they didn't realize that they could do a tribal caucus, so I'm going to have to let them know that if they want a tribal caucus in this virtual format, that I can create that for them by creating another channel. And some of them thought that, with the less attendance, at least from beginning to end of the meeting, that there wasn't as lively of discussion, and that perhaps some perspectives were missing from the discussions they had. But we did have, end up having a really good discussion with SHPO on the eligibility of stone feature sites, which has been a major issue for us, sort of a misunderstanding and disagreements on some of the finer points on that eligibility potential. And so I think that was really productive, and we're hoping that that can help us move forward in a really positive way. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Jeannie. Right, Jason, I just granted you permission. Perfect.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity to share a story. My presentation is going to be a little different. My name is Jason Watkins, by the way. I'm a staff archaeologist and tribal liaison at Ohio DOT. And mine is the story of how our tribal consultation radically changed in the last 5 years. And there's not much in the slides that's going to be helpful for you if you go back and revisit them, but I hope they're entertaining at least as we move through it. Pre-1916, we were very much check the boxes oriented, very much process oriented, and we thought we were doing a very good job at it. Post-2016, we realize that there are people behind the process or on the other side of the process, that oftentimes processes obscure the humanity. And that's what we had to learn here in Ohio, to tell you the truth. And this is the story of how that happened. And with only 10 minutes, there's the danger of sounding as if you are an advocate for no process at all. That is not what this is about. But it's saying that we realized relationships are the priority. And through the relationships, we do the process better. And this is how it happened. So in the years, there we go. I attended about 10 years ago a conference that was speaking about relationships. And one of the presenters said something that was profound to me, and it has stuck with me ever since. And he said that love is spelled T-I-M-E. Love is spelled time. And if you love something, if you love a hobby or a person, that internal feeling is going to be expressed outwardly by spending time with it. It got me thinking about tribal consultation. How is tribal consultation spelled, or what are the foundational truths to tribal consultation? And I kept coming back to the word relationship. And then as I was wrestling with this and working it through in my mind, just timely, I read an article, and this quote from Robert Thrower, Tippo at First Band of Creeks, just popped out at me. And I'm going to read a little bit extended than what you see on the screen. But he says, sometimes people forget there's a place for humanity in consultation if you view it as a relationship instead of going through necessary steps. That's bureaucratic thought. We have to do this because it is required. Yes, it is required, but do you look at it as a fulfillment of a requirement? Or do you look at it as an opportunity to build a meaningful, ongoing relationship? And that's the distinction. And that is what we had to come to understand. In 2016, we had to we wanted to check a box. That's essentially what we did, and we wanted to reconnect with our tribal partners by having a conference. In 2005, we went to Oklahoma, and in 2015, 2016, we started planning to bring tribes to here. And as we were doing so, we planned to do it in the fall of 2016, and I got a call from our Ohio History Connection, which is basically our state's historical society. And they mentioned, hey, we're also planning a conference with tribes in 2016. Why don't we partner instead of asking tribes to choose or to come to Ohio twice? That sounded pretty good to us, so we partnered with Federal Highway and the Ohio History Connection to have our Tribal Nations Conference. We split the time. And during those meetings, we asked the question, how are we doing with our consultation? Is there anything we could do better? And we felt pretty good because under the old protocol that we were operating under, we would send anywhere between, this is laughable in ways, 5-10 projects a year, and we were doing pretty good. We had those boxes checked. We're sending you information. We haven't heard from anybody, so that must be pretty good. The response set us back. Multiple tribes said to us, we never hear from Ohio. And I look back at them, I think defensively, I thought, no, you do. We send you all these letters. I know I have. I've mailed them out myself. I think what they were actually saying was, we have no connection between you folks in this room and those long, impersonal letters that are sent out infrequently from your office. And as our conversations continued, 3 key topics emerged, and they had to deal with relationships, communication, and contact. Relationships, they said, we need to keep these conversations going that we start here in this room. Whether it's by email or by phone or face-to-face meetings, we need to continue them, even if it's not project related. Get to know us, keep in touch. And they encouraged this meeting that we were having to be an annual event. Communication. We also learned that a one size does not fit all when it comes to tribal consultation. And this might seem like old news to a lot of people, but in Ohio, it was profound to us. Each tribe had their own interests, their own needs, and their own desires and the ways of doing business. And we had to meet that. It was up to us to meet that. And in a contact, they said, well, who in your office can we contact if we have a question? Our response, in hindsight, retrospect, it was kind of flippant and maybe arrogant. We said, well, whoever's managing the project. Now that hurts to think that's how we answered. And they said, that won't work. That just adds to us trying to find a group of people that we're really not familiar with. We would like a tribal liaison. So after those meetings, we went back to the drawing board and we started to really look at how we did consultation. And the first thing we decided to do was to make the Ohio Tribal Nations Conference an annual event. And we continued to partner with Federal Highway and the Ohio History Connection to do so. This year will be our 5th annual. We're not quite to 20 like Iowa there, but we're getting close. We'll catch up someday. And I'm not sure what the group photo is going to look like virtually this year, but we will figure out something. We also created a tribal liaison position. The key aspect of that is to maintain and continue to build these relationships that we started. We also had to find a way to meet the communication needs of individuals in each tribe. And we have what we call Environet in our, it's a system. It's really our environmental documentation and approval system that also houses all of our environmental files. And agencies can go in there and they can read the files and they can make comments or they can approve through this system. We said, well, we already have this system in place. How can we enhance it for tribal coordination? So we coded a tribal profile that tribes can go in. They can select what parts of Ohio they would like to receive projects from, what types of projects from simple to complex they would like to receive information on, and then at what point in the Section 106 process they want to become involved. So they can do that inside the system. Now, 2 things I'll say about this system really quick. Number one, you might think that this decreases the amount of communication we have. Like, well, we create a system that sends everything there, we're done. It doesn't. It actually has increased our communication because we have better project information sharing at the beginning. And number 2, there are tribes that are not in the system, don't want to use it, and they do want to receive paper copies of things still. We meet that. We cater to those desires, but we still encourage, why don't you give us a try? But we still meet folks where they're at and where they want to be. These relationships that we've developed have opened up so many different opportunities for us that we would have never dreamed possible, we never even thought of. Thanks to those tribal partners that were honest with us to look at how we were doing things, have created so many different opportunities. One, education, school visits are one of the opportunities that we wouldn't have thought about by incorporating and partnering with our tribal partners to have this educational aspect. Another aspect is our scenic byway program here in Ohio. Somebody brought it to our attention. Embarrassingly, we didn't even see this right away. On those scenic byways that highlight historic events, the glaring absence was we had no native histories along any of those routes. We're just now starting this endeavor, but we're partnering with our tribal partners to allow them to tell the story and incorporate those stories of histories within those scenic byway routes. And this is an example of why relationships are so very important. We're not always going to agree, but if all we have in common is a project and we have a disagreement on that project, the outcome is going to look incredibly different than if we have a relationship already established and we're working on a project and we encounter a concern or an obstacle. In Northeast Ohio, we did some aesthetic treatments on a bridge and we worked with one tribe. And on the left, you see a rendering of a pier design, and that is a panther mound depiction. And long story short, that's an interpretation that not everybody holds, particularly between the tribes. So if we went forward on that pier design, it might look like we're advocating one side of the interpretation. We already have a relationship in place with this tribe. They didn't really like the fact that we said, we're not going to put this on, we can't put this on a pier, but they understood. And we worked together. We went back to the drawing board and we developed a new design for the pier, which was the lacrosse stick, to call attention to the visitors of this area back to the native presence in the area before European settlement. This relationship-oriented approach allowed for us to agree to disagree, but move on to something that was still successful. And we're still learning here in Ohio, obviously. We've got a long ways to go. But we no longer have the humanity obscured by process because we're checking boxes. Instead, we're seeing the people despite the process in many ways. And this will be available if anybody has any questions. Send the easy questions to me. Difficult questions you can send to Erica Schneider. She would appreciate that, I am absolutely sure. So I thank you for your time and appreciate it, and look forward to hearing more from everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm going to pass it off to Carolyn now. And just a real quick announcement, we are running a few minutes behind schedule, but this is great information. So I'm not, I don't want to cut anyone short. We have a 30-minute break coming up, so we might seep into the break a little bit, but I think you'll all agree that that's fine. So Carolyn, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. That's great. Hi, everybody. I'm Carolyn Holtoff. I'm the Cultural Resources Program Team Lead and one of the tribal liaisons for the Oregon Department of Transportation. And we wanted to create a talk where we could highlight best practices for working with TIPOs. And to that end, I actually invited two of our TIPOs here in Oregon. Carrie Miller is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer with the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And Brees Edwards is the Deputy Tribal Historic Preservation Officer with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon. And I know we don't have much time, and so I'm really going to go ahead and turn it over to Brees.
Thank you, Carolyn. If you don't mind advancing to the slide, thank you. Hello, everybody. First, let me begin with a hand raised thank you to the opportunity here and for thinking of inviting the tribes, Carolyn. I've learned a lot today and really appreciate kind of a glimpse behind the curtain of all of the DOTs out there. So thank you, everybody. I have 4.5 minutes, so I am going to do a speed presentation. So hold on, everybody. I thought I'd start with a very large macro perspective from one tribe. As many of you are experienced, I'm not going to talk for any of our neighbors. So beginning with, tribes and homelands considerations. Treaties are not only recognition of tribes and lands. They're also in a Western or Euro-American model that's been imposed to, in essence, conform to land ownership rights. However, in doing that, it doesn't address the continued stewardship responsibilities that tribes continue. And that can often look like overlapping interest areas, as we just heard, and it it's complicated. However, I think that there are many tools, as we've also heard this morning, about approaching solutions, and that's a really key element, and relationship building is part of that. So with that, I'm going to kind of give a little bit of intro to Grand Ron, in that through 7 treaties signed and executed in the mid-1800s, 14 million acres were ceded over by treaty, and that's an important number here in a moment. If you look at the map to the left there, this is a large piece of real estate in Oregon, and I'm only speaking to the land ceded. I'm not going to go into usual and custom areas. For Grand Ron, that translates into 20% of the state's land area. And more importantly, that also translates into 3/4 of the state's population as it stands 2 years ago. That means that there are many stresses on the landscape, on the infrastructure. That number is continuing to grow relative to the rest of the state. So as a tribe, looking at impacts to its cultural resources, and for Grand Ron, we take people, place, and practice to be kind of these legs of a tripod for consideration of cultural resources. So there are thousands that we record in our GIS system of places within that 14 million acres that are very important. So how do we go about the protections, the identification, and engagement with these places out on the landscape? The simple answer is through relationship. We've heard that in different ways. Relationships, good ones, can withstand rocky moments. It's not a throw your hands up and walk away situation when things don't go well. It's, as my grandmother used to say, you know that it's right once you've gotten, you're at the end when you know that it's gotten right. So that is kind of a hint at these are long-term relationships. It's about building a generational understanding amongst partners. And I know that can be very difficult with staff turnover and the like. However, for Grand Ron, with working with the ODOT and Carolyn and her cultural resources team, we've found ourselves working in partnership. Sometimes that is very project specific. Oftentimes it's having quarterly meetings with the staff. They provide a spreadsheet of undertakings, and in advance we go through our system so that we can concentrate our energies and conversation on those projects that warrant it. And those projects stay on the spreadsheet throughout their life. So we're guaranteed a moment of touch base. We're very fortunate by proximity. COVID has thrown its wrench in the works for us, like everyone. We are able to also work on providing support where possible. And that's critical. Sometimes support is boots on the ground. Sometimes that is working collectively to help with interpretation and rulemaking about language around cultural resources and the like. What we have found also in Oregon is that we have 2 other venues that we regularly engage with each other for cultural resources, and that's the Intergovernmental Cultural Resources Council, as well as the Cultural Resources Cluster. These meet 3 to 4 times a year, and are venues that we can speak more at a high level policy and provide input, provide suggestions and feedback that ODOT hears, as well as federal highways. And that helps again with the relationship, that we have a path forward and are continuing to be solution oriented. Sometimes those are complicated moments, but when we're all starting from that place, we've had great success. Sometimes that looks like programmatic agreements, MOAs, and the like. I suspect that I'm out of time, so with that, I'm going to quickly pass over.
All right, Carrie, you want to take it?
Getting myself unmuted here. Good morning or good afternoon to some folks. My name is Carrie Miller, and I work for the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla tribes, politically known as the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation out here in northeastern Oregon. And I've been working for the tribe for the last 20 years now. So thanks for talking sort of big picture of compensation. I'm really today, in my few minutes that I have, going to talk about the specifics about consulting on tribal lands and some of the issues that I have been consistently seeing from outside agencies through the years. And so the first thing I want to bring up is sort of to encourage you to familiarize yourself with tribal cultural resource codes and laws and the timeframes that go along with these. So the Umatilla tribe became a TIFO tribe back in 1996, but it probably took us until about 2000 to stop sending our data to SHPO. So for the past 2 decades, we've housed all of our cultural resource reports and the work that others have done on the reservation here in our TIFO archive. So when I get a letter from outside agencies that say, hey, we looked at the SHPO database and you have no cultural resources or historic properties, in our project area or surrounding areas, that's really frustrating to me. So know what your local TIFOs do with their data and how they share their data. So I have the expectation that our DOT partners and their consultants will make an appointment and come review our archival data. Things have gotten a little bit crazy with COVID, and so we're kind of needing to go into different protocols for that. But still, it's that exchange of information and knowing that you need to review tribal information for your project. So we have a historic preservation code. So I think most folks are familiar with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. The Historic Preservation Code also governs your project. So I'm talking about your O&M, your science going in. So know if your local tribes have codes, ordinances, things that you need to be abiding by. Under our Historic Preservation Code, DOT personnel and contractors need to get a permit to do surveys and testing on the reservation. It's our means to, one, better know about the project, but also to weigh in on the methodology that's being proposed. And so we're all on the same page. In years past, before we had our code, people would come on the reservation, do work. We didn't even know about it. And then sometimes we receive reports, sometimes we wouldn't, and they want their project to move forward. So it's kind of a checks and balance for us all. So that said, the second thing is know where the codes apply. So when you're on the reservation, you have probably learned what those boundaries are. But no, our Historic Preservation Code applies to all off-reservation trust and fee lands as well. So Carolyn, if you can flip to that next slide, the Umatilla tribes ceded about 6.4 million acres of lands in the Treaty of 1855. And so you can see the reservation in the middle there, but that's the general landscape in which we consult in. And then in the last number of decades, we've been reacquiring parcels of lands in that 6.4 million acres. Excuse me. So the tribe has both fee lands that we've purchased or acquired through mitigation, and trust lands. So those lands that are federal, held in trust by the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the tribes. So fee and trust lands in both Washington and Oregon states that are subject to the code. And so we have state highways running through these parcels or adjacent to these parcels. So know that those apply to your project. I'll also say familiarize yourself with non-cultural resource codes and laws and regs. Excuse me. Last year, I'll say we had a learning opportunity when we had a weigh station being replaced here up on the hill, trying to beat the snow. Understand good project, but because they hadn't done a lot of projects on the reservation, failed to go through our planning office and get development permits and electrical permits. So as you work through the cultural resource side of things and the time frames that are associated with the different processes, know that there's probably also tribal codes in the planning departments or whatever other departments that they may have that you'll need to take into consideration as you plan your project. One other thing I thought would be interesting to bring up today is about agreements. And maybe Carolyn, back on that other slide, it was just sort of a snapshot. Carolyn, I think, has spoken to this group about the IGAs that ODOT has with a number of tribes here in Oregon. We do a lot of work on and off reservation with a robust field crew and program here. But we've also entered into a separate work order agreement for signs. So as I said, we have a historic preservation code, so that governs signs going up on the reservation. And so this is kind of a unique mechanism to help expedite projects. The district sign coordinator will contact me. We just got an email yesterday about 2 new signs going in. And I think the more data you can share with the reviewers, the more helpful it is. You know, are you trying to put in new signs in the road prism? Is it in the outside extent of the right of way? Is it in field? Is it going back in the same hole? It gives me a chance to review those new signs. Going back into the same hole, great, sign off on. If it's out in the edge of the right of way, that's probably still intact in native soils. Maybe we're going to require a monitor. And so it outlines time frames for getting that monitor in place, the 90 days that the tribe has to then compile the monitoring report, send that to ODOT, and after ODOT's review, then they'll ultimately send it to me as the tribal and historic preservation officer for review. So I find that's a pretty unique tool that we have to help ODOT move their projects along a little faster. One other thing kind of came up this week that I decided to throw in here. And so my ask is if you can help to educate your subcontractors about these processes too, once you learn them yourself. Local fiber, telecommunications, folks that are doing work for your projects, they just can't bury something in the right of way without going through the processes. So the more we can educate folks, the smoother the processes are, and then hopefully cultural resources is the one that's holding up projects, so it's really seem to get blamed in the end for delaying things. So those were a few things that I thought about specifically about tribal lands, typical jurisdiction that I needed to constantly remind folks about that I wanted to share today. And I just appreciate the time, appreciate the few minutes that I had, and thanks for the invitation here. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much to Carrie and Grace for participating. It was just incredibly helpful. And they have both made themselves available to attend one of our future subcommittee meetings if there are additional questions.
Thanks, Carolyn. Laura, I'm going to give you power to share your screen. 1 second.
Okay, can everybody see the screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to run the PowerPoint presentation and just want to make sure that y'all see the screen and not my notes.
So we can see the screen, but can you minimize your control panel? We also see that. Just click the orange arrow at the top. There you go. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. So my name is Laura Cruzada, and I do tribal consultation and public outreach for TxDOT's Environmental Affairs Division. And I'm a little bit of an odd person out from this group as well as from the rest of our subject matter experts because I do not have a degree in anthropology or archaeology. My background is in public outreach and public involvement. And so I was hired in 2015 to kind of revamp how we did tribal consultation. And some of y'all have probably heard about some of the projects that we've done over the years, but today I'm gonna focus on a new project that we're working on with tribes that we developed through partnership and consultation and relationship building. And in 2018, through research funding from TxDOT's Transportation Planning and Programming Division, we worked with tribes to host a meeting in person to identify and prioritize some of the issues that tribes were facing when dealing with federal agencies and undertakings. And so, so from 2015 to 2018, we kept hearing the same issues come up over and over again, and we didn't really have opportunities at TxDOT until we received this funding from our planning and programming division. One of those issues was traditional cultural properties. It was at the top of the issues that tribes wanted to deal with and address with TxDOT, and we just didn't have any precedent for doing so. But we workshopped the ideas and identified several problem statements in that workshop. One of them was that tribes would like to be able to research and identify TCPs with TxDOT during consultation. Tribes may not know what resources are out there because a majority of the 28 tribes that we consult with do not reside in Texas. We only have 3 resident tribes. Another problem statement that came up that was related to the TCP issue was that the academic literature around tribes history in Texas, which is cited and used in a lot of the archaeological technical reports, surveys, and background studies, it did not take into account tribes' presence in Texas after European contact. And so what we see in the literature is that the narrative begins and ends with archaeological records. However, we all know that tribes were still in Texas after contact, and they've had a tremendous influence in the state. And so with further funding from our other division, we created together with the tribes what we call the Tribal Texas Native Voices of Vision Project. This is the formal name for what we shorthand call Tribal Histories Project. The project works with tribes to identify places and resources on the landscape that are of interest to tribes, and it also raises awareness about tribes' history throughout the state. So it's twofold. We're researching on behalf of the tribes, we're working with them to create this research, and then we're also doing a public outreach campaign to educate people about tribes' presence and their history in the state. The Native Voices of Vision project includes research white papers and a publication documenting tribal influence on Texas culture, in addition to a geographic information system that maps such resources throughout the state. I'm not going to go into really great detail about the GIS portion of it, but it is going to be based on tribes' voluntary participation, and it'll focus on the types of resources that tribes want to focus on. So if one tribe wants to focus on plant resources, that's what we'll be documenting on their behalf. And if the tribes want to focus on native trails or traces, historic traces, then we'll be focusing on that for their research. Hold on just 1 second.
Presentation. Where is it? Where's my phone? I'm on a presentation.
I am so sorry about that. So the GIS system, like I said, is a voluntary system, and it's going to be on a tribe by tribe basis, and it'll be confidential per that tribe and with TxDOT. And what that GIS system is going to do is allow us to map out resources way ahead of time during the planning portions of our projects, and make sure that we are taking those resources into consideration. There's several public outreach deliverables as part of this project as well. One is a publication that'll be distributed to the general public, posted online, and shared with our partners in education. It'll include a traveling exhibit as well as educational activities for teachers to share with students online. And then there's also an outreach publication and white paper that we'll be developing for tribes. And so for that deliverable, tribes can also focus on similar issues that they want to either document for their tribe or educate using our research to post on their websites, for instance. So all of these things we're doing in collaboration, and each tribe has an opportunity to participate at the level they want. We have consultants completing the project, and so far we have several tribes that have gone to the most comprehensive level of the project, which is the GIS system, and the feedback we've received from them is really positive. And then we have other tribes who may not know their history in Texas as well because it's not documented. So our researchers are helping them document that, and they've appreciated that so that they can add it to their archives and literature. But I will also, I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint and share the publication that's going to be distributed hopefully by the end of this year. And so that publication is called Texas and Tribes Shared Traditions. And I just want to make sure that you guys can see this. Do y'all see my screen with the cover of the publication? Are you guys still on?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. That's okay. So the publication explains a little bit about why we're doing the project and what it means to have shared traditions throughout Texas. And so we start with a story to kind of appeal to people's understanding of Texas history and that it doesn't just start at the Alamo. And we worked in consultation with tribes to come up with 3 themes for the project. For the publication in terms of tribes' influence on Texas culture. And that includes lifeways, foodways, and pathways. And so I'm happy to share this publication with y'all when it's completely vetted and final with all of our consulting tribes, because I think it's a really great tool that addresses the tribe's concerns that they identified through our relationship building and meaningful consultation. And it's really exciting, and I think that it'll really, really help increase the understanding of tribes' influence in Texas. So that's it from me. And again, I apologize for my kid barging in here. I was thinking maybe more people, it would happen to more people, but it just happened to me. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks to everyone on this panel. It was great information. We did get a few questions in during the presentations, and I'm having the speakers answer those right now, and we'll have them available to y'all when you come back from the break in the questions box. So with that, we are a little bit past our break, so I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and take 15-minute break, maybe come back at 3:05 Eastern time. And just as a reminder, you can leave your webinar running and then just pop back in at 3:05 Eastern time. So with that, I will enjoy your little break. All right, everyone. Welcome back from our abbreviated break. It is 3:05, so I am happy to turn it over to Tony Opperman, who's going to introduce our next panel. Take it away, Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us for what I believe is going to be an interesting and informative presentation on context-sensitive design options for workhorse bridges in rural historic districts, also known as NCHRP 2525 Task 118. Task 118 was one of the final products of NCHRP's 2525 program of research supporting AASHTO's Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainability. As a topic, it was initially suggested by Ira Beckerman, now retired from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. As a product, I believe it reflects the best of the 2525 program and NCHRP generally. It's practical, interdisciplinary, implementable, and national in scope. Now let me take a few minutes to introduce you to the panelists this afternoon. First, we're joined by Camilla McDonald, Manager Historic Preservation with WSP USA and Principal Investigator for Task 118. We're also joined by Ann Miller, Research Scientist and Historian at the Virginia Transportation Research Council, a division of the Virginia Department of Transportation. Ann chaired the panel overseeing Task 118 and is one of the most recognized authorities on historic bridges in the country. We're also joined by Bob Hadlow, PhD, Senior Historian with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and one of the panelists who oversaw Task 118. Like Ann, Bob is one of the most recognized authorities on historic bridges in the United States. Finally, our last panelist is Junyi Meng, PE, Assistant State Structure and Bridge Engineer for Engineering Services with the Virginia Department of Transportation, who joins us to provide an engineering perspective on aspects of Task 118, especially pertaining to the reevaluation of MASH standards for railing designs. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Camilla and to Bob, and we'll be able to get into the presentation on Task 118 in a little bit more detail than they were able to during the TRB meeting in August. So take it away, Camilla and Bob.
Camilla, this is Melissa. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to make a quick announcement to everyone. If you did raise your hand, please enter your question into the question box just so we can get started on this session. I know we did have a raised hand, so please feel free to enter your question into the question box. Thanks. All right. Sorry, Camilla.
Nope, you're fine. Can you see my screen?
We sure can.
Okay. Okay. I just see myself, so I'll hide that. Thank you, Tony, for that wonderful introduction to our presentation today. This was a really fun and exciting project to do, and we're thrilled that it has such a great application for everybody and will be useful for practitioners out there. We really enjoyed doing it, and that was our main goal. So if that's a success, then we are way ahead of the game. So as Tony mentioned, this is NCHRP Task 118. It was really conducted in response to the increasing number of rural bridge replacements within historic districts, particularly rural historic districts that were being encountered by state DOTs in their projects. Context-sensitive design for bridges in these districts presents a particular challenge because there's limited built environment to supply design context. I mean, a little term I use is there's no there. There's no buildings, there's no tangible things to draw design inspiration from. So one of the primary research objectives of the project was to develop a practitioner-ready resource for context that contain context-sensitive design examples that would be appropriate for workhorse bridges in rural historic districts. And then a secondary objective was to address specific design components common to successful examples of these designs, and then as well as costs and other things associated with such designs. In order to get to these tasks, to complete these tasks, the project team completed a number of project activities, including kind of the standard state of practice survey, which consists of extensive literature review and a screening survey. And some of you have done numerous of those surveys in the past, followed up by an in-depth survey, and then a series of telephone interviews on specific projects that highlight the design process. And of course, these activities were designed to gather this information from the practitioners, the DOTs, SHPOs, engineers, other practitioners, and to understand the state of practice for context-sensitive design for these bridges in rural historic districts, and develop kind of a repository of successful design examples. And just for your information, the illustrations on the top is Falls County Road Bridge in Falls County, Texas. And the bottom one is Route 206 Flood Channel Bridge in Princeton, New Jersey. So going through this process of the surveys and the interviews, that was all gathered designed to gather details regarding project approach, public involvement process, design, and generally the outcome of some of these specific case study projects. Again, to better understand what were the successful strategies. And in all, we came up with 11 case studies from Oregon, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, New Mexico, Michigan, and Texas. And we, of course, thank all of these states for giving us the great information that we needed to do these case studies. So when we were looking at all of these case studies and pretty much all the projects that we were looking at, they all fell into 5 general approaches that were really, they kind of evolved naturally from the specific circumstance of each of the bridges. So those 5 approaches were regional. This draws influence from regional bridge styles, as well as maybe from a desire to create a modern regional tradition. Replication, which is rather self-explanatory. You want to replicate the bridge that you're replacing. Previous bridges, so you might take inspiration from maybe the original bridge at the site and not the existing bridge that you're replacing. Stakeholder driven, which is really centered on the public involvement process, uses stakeholder input as more of a driving factor in the proposed design. And then design/safety driven. So, excuse me, this stems from the necessity of a replacement design to address engineering design aspects or specific safety issues of the existing bridge that need to be addressed. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of case studies that kind of highlight these 5 approaches. The first one that we are going to briefly talk about is Morgan's Ford Bridge in Warren County, Virginia. When I first saw the picture of this bridge, it scared me. It's a scary scenario. The replacement design for this bridge was obviously driven by safety issues of the low water structure. Flooding events consistently caused overtopping, making the bridge impassable 60 days out of the year, and resulted in several deaths prior to replacement. So VDOT designed a heightened superstructure composed of box beams side by side to create a nice smooth bottom underneath so that there was no debris got caught under the bridge. And with safety as the number one priority, 2 design goals guided this process. The first, elevate the bridge so as to reduce the overtopping, but avoid excessively lengthening the bridge, which would increase cost and complicate the design. And then secondly, considerable time that was spent on the railing design from a safety perspective, as well as from an aesthetics perspective. The railing had to be high enough to safely contain vehicles on the bridge and be visually compatible visually compatible with the location, which was a rural historic district, and there was really no built environment anywhere around this to draw from. So VDOT, in consultation with National Park Service, directed the project team to use the Caltrans concrete barrier type 80, which was a rail type used for historic bridges and considered to be sympathetic to the historic district, yet sturdy enough to withstand the beating from the water. And Junyi will be talking a bit more about this bridge later, I believe, in his presentation on the MASH criteria. So then another example, also from Virginia, is the Secretary Sand Road Bridge in Albemarle County, Virginia. This one is stakeholder driven. You know, when you think about stakeholder driven, it doesn't mean that the public is driving the entire design of the bridge, but rather specific features might be influenced by stakeholder input, like rail type, form liner finish, or in this case, something as simple as color. So Secretary Sand Road Bridge is, as you can see, a truss bridge. And color really was an important aspect of this design process. And color can be a funny thing, as Anne, I may pull you in here to allude to the difficulty of color. So when dealing with color, you have to be careful to choose a color that doesn't falsely historicize the new bridge. Colors that may seem historic to the bridge may not have had anything to do with the historic bridge. It might be inferred as historic just because everyone that knows the bridge knew it as that color, but it may not be the same color as it was originally. Then you also have the difficulty of, you know, historic photos often are black and white and kind of can't help you in that department when you're talking about color. So Anne, if you want to chime in, feel free to give your opinion on color or any more details on this specific project. I know it was a great project for you and really highlighted color and its intricacies, shall we say.
Okay, well, thank you. This is a bridge that I have some particular interest in because it's a very simple solution to what can be a complicated issue at times. We did have a local preservation group that lobbied very hard to preserve the old bridge, which had multiple problems. It was down to a 3-ton limit and actually was dropping below that. 100% section loss. This is a standard plan truss from the early 20th century. The bridge was not able to carry modern agricultural and emergency traffic, which was a major consideration for the local stakeholders. Interestingly enough, the stakeholders' desires did not mesh with the regional preservation group. They wanted something that somewhat evoked the old bridge, but were mainly interested in something that was close to the color. The color, of course, was not an actual bridge paint. It was a faded version of some mid-20th century or a later 20th century bridge paint. So it turned out that when we were able to produce a color that was very close to the faded green, the stakeholders were very, very happy with this, and this is what we put up. We put up a modern truss, not something that replicated the original truss, but that evoked it, and we came up with the color that was very close to it. And the stakeholders have been very happy. The bridge is performing well, and it is carrying safely the local traffic. And it's still something that is compatible with the Southern Albemarle Historic District. So back to you, Kamala.
Thank you, thank you. And it is really a great illustration of how something as simple as color can really turn the page on acceptance of a design and really change it to be acceptable to stakeholders. So our third case study is the Chenoweth Creek Bridge, and I am going to turn it over to Bob Hadlow from Oregon DOT to tell us about this really awesome case study.
Hey, Robert, I think you might be muted.
I am muted?
Yeah, now you're good.
Okay, good, I am now. Hi, this is Bob Hadlow with the Oregon Department of Transportation, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Chenoweth Creek Bridge. I don't know if my face is showing up or not here. I guess it isn't. It doesn't really have to. And I'll have to have someone advance my slides for me, but that's fine. So this project was called, what I titled this talk is Achieving a Balanced Solution, Developing a Crash-Worthy Deck Railing for the new bridge in the Columbia River Highway National Historic Landmark District. And there's a photo of it there on the title sheet. Let's go to the next page. So what is the Columbia River Highway Historic District? Well, it's a historic road on the south shores of the Columbia River, east of Portland. It was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1983, designated a National Historic Landmark in 2000. There are 51 miles of the 74 original miles are part of the landmark district, and we have 54 contributing structures, buildings, and objects. Many of those structures are bridges. And so next slide, please. So just to give you a visual here, the highway starts at Troutdale, about 17 miles east of Portland, and ends at the Dalles, 74 miles east of Portland. And the bridge we're focusing on today is the Chenoweth Creek Bridge, which is at the extreme eastern end of the historic district. It's really the gateway, the eastern gateway to the Columbia River Highway NHL district. Next. Next, please. There we go. So the promoters of this highway were many business persons in Portland and others. Sam Hill, a railroad engineer, or a railroad attorney and promoter of good roads in the Pacific Northwest, and business folks in Portland wanted to have a road up the Columbia River on the south side of the river on the Oregon shore. And they were looking to have a road that was sensitive to the natural landscape and also well engineered. So I have a few photographs here that illustrate the sensitivity to the landscape that went into the road's design. And what we have are masonry guard walls and retaining walls, masonry portal tunnels. Actually, they started out as natural portal tunnels, but the rockfall was so severe that folks came back and put in human-made masonry, I guess you call it. And then we have some wonderful waterfalls, and part of the highway's construction included Multnomah Falls Lodge and a few other daytime lodges for travelers to stop and have a meal and take in wonderful sights. Let's go to the next slide, please. Next. Design standards. In 1913, when construction on this road began, there were no design standards in this country. In fact, a few years later, AASHTO and all the state highway departments are getting together to develop design standards. So here we have a road where Sam Lancaster, Bureau of Public Roads engineer who ended up working for the state of Oregon and for Multnomah County, developed a road with maximum 5% grade, minimum 200-foot turning radiuses on curves, roadway width of 24 feet with an 18-foot travel way. There was no center line in those days, and asphalted concrete pavement. This is one of the 3 sets of loops on the highway. This is on the eastern end near the Dalles, where we have about 10 inches of rain per year. The earlier photos with the moss and the ferns is in the center of the gorge, where we have closer to 100 inches of rain per year. So let's go on to the next slide here. Another part of the highway that is really endearing is the well-engineered collection of bridges, and all of them but 2 are reinforced concrete bridges. Many of them arches. Here we have 3 in the heart of the gorge, some of the earliest days of using reinforcing steel in concrete bridges. And they're a wonderful collection. They're still there. They're still in use. They're great. They're great to explore. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So we get to our project. Now here in the far eastern portion of the gorge, we had 3 bridges that were up for some type of work. 2 of them were the Mosher Creek Bridge and the Dry Canyon Creek Bridge, which are reinforced concrete arches from about 1920. And then we had the Chenoweth Creek Bridge, which is a small beam bridge, reinforced concrete beam bridge that had footing problems and other issues, and it was scheduled for replacement. So let's go on to the next slide. Well, here's some close-ups of those 2 arch bridges, and the work involving those included realkalizing the bridges, adjusting the pH so that they have a little more longer life, patching concrete, removing some utilities, or at least tucking them up under the deck, and then doing a cementitious sealer applied to the exteriors of the bridges to even out the tone and to also protect them from weather. But the center of our talk today is the Chenoweth Creek Bridge. So let's go on to the Chenoweth Creek Bridge. But you'll notice here, so the Chenoweth Creek Bridge at the eastern end of the highway, and it lived a tough life. You'll see the photo in the top right corner. It had nice segmental arched railings, much like what you saw on those 2 reinforced concrete arch bridges. But in later years, those failed, and the Oregon Department of Transportation removed the railings and put in just basic W rail. We included this bridge in the National Historic Landmark nomination as a contributing feature, even though the railings had been changed, because the agency's goal was to recreate the railings at some point, and we had done that on another bridge nearby. As it turns out, when the state removed the railings initially, they didn't really just cut the railings off at the curb, but they cut the curbs off also. So there was really no place to reattach historic rails. But we did include it in the landmark nomination in the late 90s. And lo and behold, a few years ago, we needed to replace the bridge, and it was a contributing feature to the NHL district. So we had a bit of a conundrum here. Would removing this bridge have an adverse effect on an NHL district? And that's really really could doom a project. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Well, the Oregon Department of Transportation has been developing a program to retrofit historic bridges with what we call a stealth rail. Our bridge preservation unit, which has had a great track record with keeping our older bridges standing up and being safe and able to handle traffic loads, have developed so-called stealth rail in the last 10, 15 years, which recreates original sidewalk rails on bridges, but they're constructed of structural steel encased in concrete that look just like the rails that were there originally. And what we have here is some examples on the Oregon City Arch, 1923 plate girder or plate steel through arch that the department completed to span the Willamette River. And during a major rehab project, we recreated the original rail. It's a bit taller, but it's structurally sound, and it can contain a vehicle from punching through and dropping into the river. And then we have another example here at the South Umpqua River Bridge, which has a segmental arch, very similar to what we saw on the two arch bridges and on the original Chenoweth Creek Bridge. And our goal was to, in replacing the old bridge with a new bridge, to recreate this railing on that bridge. Let's go to the next slide. But we had a bit of a problem. We were trying to recreate an old style rail on a new bridge, not on an old bridge. And the new bridge needed, at that location, wouldn't be an exact replica of what was there, which was a 60-foot long bridge with 20 feet curb to curb. Needed a longer bridge, and the big concern was it would be wider, 34 feet rather than 24 curb to curb. And our bridge designers believed that they couldn't simply install a stealth version of the original rail, that it had to be something different because of the geometry, the design speed, the wider bridge, higher design speed, the worry, the fear of vehicles snagging on a bridge with openings on the rails. So we all had to sit down. There was still, our cultural resources staff had consulted with the folks at the Historic Preservation Office, and we concluded that removing the original Chenoweth Creek Bridge in its bad state wouldn't have an adverse effect on the district, but whatever we replaced it with, we would have to avoid an adverse effect on the district itself as a whole. So we really had that in mind in trying to find what we call a balanced solution to meet everyone's needs, to meet the needs of cultural resources folks, and also to meet the needs of our engineers. At the end of the day, someone had to sign off on the plans. Some of the guidance that I used here was developed as part of another NCHRP project, 25-29A, Guidance on Design and Management of Historic Roads. And there is where we really coined the term balanced solutions. I was on that panel when we developed that. And it's not just for bridges, but for any types of alterations one would want to make to a historic road, historic highway, in this case, a historic bridge. So that was really my goal here, was to work with our bridge design staff and the state bridge engineer to find a solution that everyone could be happy with. So here you see a drawing at the bottom showing the new bridge. Like I said, it's about 89 feet from end to end with about 20 feet of a rail extending beyond. And then it's a clear span so that we have no obstructions from high flow events coming through Chenoweth Creek. And the goal here was to design this railing to a TL4 loading, and a non-crash tested rail, but one that is designed according to the ODOT Bridge Design and Drafting Manual for a TL4 loading. Next slide, please. So here we have a good drawing of this rail, and it evolved a bit. The initial rail had 18 inches of flush concrete at the bottom to be snag free, so to speak, and then openings above that. And that's what we still have here, but our cultural resources folks thought, well, we needed to do a little bit more to it so it didn't just look like an 18-inch rail, flat rail with openings on top. And we put some character lines in it, and that really helped. It mimics a curb, or where a sidewalk might have been if this bridge were at a different location. But it is very similar to the old standard type A rail, the segmental arch rail that you saw on those two concrete arches, and similar to what was on the original Chenoweth Creek Bridge. Next slide, please. So I think what it comes down to, and this is what we learned with NCHRP 25-29, and an engineer with Central Federal Lands Highway Division of FHWA was I think the person who really gave us some insight here. We're trying to mesh our 7 aspects of integrity that we use when we're looking at properties for register eligibility and levels of effect with the 13 controlling design criteria for roadways that engineers use in designing roads and road features, including bridges. When we can all get that together, where our 7 aspects of integrity will come together with the 13 controlling design criteria for roadways, then we can have a balanced solution. And when our state bridge engineer said, I think we have a balanced solution, I didn't put the words in his mouth. He articulated them himself. I thought, now we're where we need to be. So let's go to the next slide. Well, this is just the design exception. We went through a formal process where the designer of record is there at the top, the state bridge engineer, the tech center manager, and finally the state roadway engineer who really trumps everybody. And once the state roadway engineer signs this and stamps it along with the design engineer, then we had our design exception. We have a railing that's not tested, but it's designed according to standards, and everybody was comfortable with it. And we thought it was great. So let's go on to the next slide. Here we have the bridge. It's a 90-foot clear span with precast pre-stressed beams and precast deck panels. We had a very short window to construct this bridge, mainly because it was a school bus route. But you can also see that we have the nice segmental arch rail. It spans across the entire bridge, plus about 20 feet on each end. Railings flare out just like the original ones did. Let's go to the next slide. Here's some construction photos. What we can see is that the top parts of these rails they start out as welded structural steel members. The top parts are precast offsite, and then they brought in, and then reinforcing bar is added, and the bottom part, the solid smooth section, is cast in place. And see here the crews working feverishly in the late summer of 2017 to get this done before Labor Day. At the bottom there, you see the finished product, but it still needs to be buffed out, and then a cementitious sealer, which has a bit of a tint to it, is applied to even things out and to protect the structure for decades, we hope. Next slide, please. A few more photos of this bridge. I think it came out really, really well. It's the Gateway Bridge. It has a posted speed of 40 because we're entering an urban district. We're at the edge, and we're entering an urban district, a design speed of 50 miles an hour. It doesn't seem too wide, like a freeway bridge, but it was wide enough to meet all the concerns for vehicular traffic, bike traffic, maybe pedestrians walking along the side. One of the commitments was to add a nameplate at the end. It says Chenoweth Creek Bridge 2017, so there's no mistake that it's not an old bridge. We had to put wires behind the openings there, so we had a maximum 6-inch opening to meet code, so that no animals would fall through there. But those are small considerations. Next slide, please. So in the end, we had a pretty tight timeline on this project, and we were working during Christmas break in 2016. A lot of conference calls and shooting designs back and forth, and we had to meet some timelines here so that we could get a bid package and get things moving for a summer construction season. And we did it, and for about $9 million, a little over $9 million. And next slide, please. That's it. This is a selfie station that we created in that ODOT's Historic Highway folks created in 2016 as part of a centennial celebration. And I'm there with one of my federal FHWA buddies getting our photo taken. Anyway, I guess that's the end of my presentation, and we can go back to Camilla.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. That's awesome. Yeah, there's Melissa right on cue. Okay, so I know we're running a little short on time, so I am going to have Melissa put up the location of the TRB website for this project. The two main products are the design idea book, which is a really great document for practitioners to use with stakeholders for figuring out what design approach is best for your situation. And it really has a lot of great sections in there on aspects of how to get to an approach, aspects of a design that can be changed, and then talking about things that can't be changed. Some of those controlling design criteria, you can't mess around with some of those. So it is really a great document. So I encourage you to go to that website and take a look. because I know everybody is going to want to talk about railings and we're going to want to talk about the MASH standards. So one of the things in the design idea book, it goes over all the rail options that have been used by state DOTs and counties for workhorse bridge replacements. And there's a sort of a profile page of each that gives you some, what is it suitable for, some cost criteria that we know of if we could find it, a photo, and where it's used and what it's rated. So that's also a really great resource. But for right now, we're going to move on to the MASH standards. So Juni, if you want to take over, I will mute myself and I will take care of forwarding those slides for you.
Great, Camilla. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Juni Man. As Tony introduced, I'm a bridge engineer with Virginia Department of Transportation. I know it's a long day for everybody. I'll try to keep this brief. I'm going to talk about the new crash test standard for bridge railings. Rob just presented some beautiful bridge railings, and I will provide you some information from the structural standpoint. MASH, or AASHTO manual for assessing safety hardware, is a new crash test standard. It replaced its predecessor NCHRP report 350 in January 2016. The pictures here show what the two documents look like. And there are 4 crash test bridge railings or roadside barriers that are not for design and the design of bridge railings. So I will give you a very brief introduction of MASH. And there's 2 crash test facilities in the United States. And one is a Midwest roadside safety facility. It's located in University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Another one is TTI, is located in the Texas A&M University. And since Virginia participates in the pool fund program in Midwest, so I attended the annual meeting in Midwest and witnessed some crash tests. And they use real vehicles to conduct the crash test as well as computer simulations. So it's very expensive, it's the time consuming. I believe all states require crash test bridge railings to a great degree. And the FHW requires crash tested bridge railings on the national highway system. In Virginia, bridge railings have to be crash tested for the state bridges. And next, please. All right. So basically 4 types of vehicles are used for crash test. And they are small cars, pickup trucks, and the single unit trucks, and tractor trailers. And if comparing the second column and the third column of the table, you may find that the weights of the vehicles are increased from NCHRP 350 to MASH. So in other words, and MASH has a higher crash test requirements. I will talk about how to use these vehicles for different test levels in the next slide. So there's basically 6 test levels in MASH. For the purpose of comparison, at least the 3 most common test levels. Like the first, as the first column shows, test level 3, test level 4, and test level 5. The second column in this table shows the test vehicles we just talked about, and the third and the fourth columns shows the crash test the speed and then the angles. Actually, the angles between the longitudinal direction of the railings and the test vehicles. So theoretically, the maximum angle can be like 90 degrees. The minimum can be 0. So actually, they pick up from 15 degrees to 25 degrees. I think they're very representative. And as you may know, the bigger the angle, the bigger the impact of the vehicle to the bridge railing. So you may say either the angle or the speed in the third and the fourth columns are increased from NCHRP 350 to mesh. Again, I think the mesh has a higher crash test requirements. I think everybody probably knows, we have more and faster and big vehicles these days. And then from the design standpoint, TL3 is used for wide range of high-speed highways with a very low mixtures of heavy vehicles. TL4 is used for the majority of freeways and interstates with a mixture of trucks and heavy vehicles. TL5 is used for the same applications as the TL4, and where larger trucks make up a significant portion of the average daily traffic. TL2 is not shown here, but TL2 is for local roads. Next slide, please. FHWA issued a memorandum in January 2016 for the projects on the highway national highway system with the lighting date, after December 31st, 2019. That's last year already passed this date. So all the bridge railings shall be mesh compliant. I think most of the states have complied with this policy. But as Rob just talked about that bridge, if we cannot find a crash tested bridge railing, we can design. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to show some examples of the bridge railings that were crash tested according to mesh. The railing on the left side is a 32 inches tall TL3 bridge railing. You may use this one for many roads except for freeways and interstates. But it cannot be used on a bridge that carries pedestrian traffic. AASHTO requires the pedestrian railings have a minimum height of 42 inches. So the railing on the right side is 42 inches tall and TL2 railings, bridge railing. Some people call this one as like a church rail. It can be used for local roads with a small number of heavy vehicles. Next slide, please. So the railing on the left side is a 36 tall TL3 bridge railing. It consists of the steel rails, posts, and the concrete pedestal. You can paint the steel rails with the color that blends with the environment. And the railing on the right side is 42 inches tall and a TL5. TL5 is not wrong, it's TL5. So you may use it on the interstate bridges. So as you may say, most of the aesthetic bridge railings are open rails. Generally speaking, they are weaker than the solid barriers. However, I think through communications, we can always balance context-sensitive design and the structural requirements. That is all I have today. Thanks.
Thank you. That was awesome. So that is the end of our presentation. So does anybody have any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions in the questions box.
Okay.
But would remind, oh wait, here's one, let's see. Hang on. Oh, so there, someone is typing in a question, it looks like.
Okay.
Well, this is Bob. One thing I might add about the railing that we used on Chenoweth, it was an as equivalent railing that wasn't tested for TL4, but as I understand it, our department's plans are to have that railing tested, and then it would be available for others to use, once it's rated, tested, and approved, so to speak. So that's something that we're looking forward to, because we put a lot of effort into that railing, and we believe it came out so well. And it was a new bridge, not an old bridge. So our hope is that others can benefit from that and have it as an off-the-shelf option. So that's great. So I can't wait to see that happen. So.
Okay, here's a question. If a MASH approved steel railing is covered with something, say a wood replica covering, is it still MASH approved?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I missed part of that.
Sure. If a MASH approved steel railing is covered with something, say a wood replica covering, is it still MASH approved?
That's a very good question. This is Junie. I don't want to say yes or no, because I think the best way is talk to the like I said, there's a two crash test facilities United States. One is the Midwest, one is the TTI. I think the best way is to contact them and get their input. But I guess it's maybe okay. But those guys satisfy the crash test bridge drainage, so that they have the last word to say. So I guess yes, but you need to contact them.
Thank you. We have another question. For the last barrier, can relief sculpting be added as a design amenity?
You mean the last one I showed, the TL5, or?
It doesn't specify. I would imagine whichever image was last. Yeah, probably that one.
Mm-hmm. So can you repeat the question for me? I'm sorry.
Sure. Can relief sculpting be added as a design amenity?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that one. Robert, do you have any idea you can
About design, about artwork on or adding to this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. We haven't addressed that at ODOT. I want to get back to the previous question though too. ODOT back in the 90s developed a 2-rail steel-backed wooden guardrail, not necessarily for use on bridges, but for use along the Columbia River Highway to replace W-rail and a whole assortment of crash rails that were on the road that had come about over decades. And we did have that tested at TTI. And at the time, in the late 1980s, it met crash standards, and we installed it all along the highway, not necessarily on bridges, but the point was that it was a wooden rail with heavy galvanized steel backing and heavy hardware on these posts that went way deep into the ground. But it doesn't meet current crash standards. That's our dilemma with that right now, is that if we install new rail, we have to bring it up to a new standard. So, but the point is, it's not to say you can't do something. You have to talk with your engineers, but we did do it along the roadway itself, and demonstrated that one could create a railing that would contain traffic and provide an element of safety. So.
And I suppose with the sculpting, you probably wouldn't want to do it on the inside, because that would increase snagging, correct? You would have to limit it to the outside of the bridge for decorative. I wouldn't think you would want to put decorative on the inside, but you never know.
ODOT developed some railings for use along Interstate 84 in the gorge. You have all sorts of, one of the design elements that folks remember is that segmental arch with the straight sides and the curved top. And we had to replace some barrier on freeway bridges and replace some, I guess, metal barrier with concrete barrier, pretty much like a GM barrier. But the goal was to make it a little more sympathetic with the landscape and echo some of the historical images. And we used form liners to create impression of segmental arches along the back side. They weren't all the way through, but still it integrated the freeway bridges a bit better into the landscape because it was an art element that people associated with the historic highway and with the gorge. It worked pretty well. We still may be using that, but it's something that was on the back side and not on the front side, and that was why it was so easy to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Kind of following that regional approach to the modern bridges.
Exactly. And we do have some Interstate 84 corridor plan, which plays off on, in some ways, what you see on the historic highway, and other ways just more of just strictly a Columbia Gorge theme. And that's informed us on several bridges that we've replaced along I-84. Not to say they want to make them look like the bridges on the historic highway, but they all work together, and that's the point. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the regional approach, the regional approach doesn't have to be geographic, like in a certain area. It can be the linear, the Lincoln Highway, or looking at a particular roadway and the patterns along that roadway, even though it might span 2 or 3 counties.
And that's it with this road. I mean, we're looking at 80 miles. We're looking at 74 miles. 50 miles of it, or 51 miles, are in the NHL district. 54 are in our district. The difference is those had low integrity. But the point is, we have 2 drivable sections that are 20 miles apiece, and then some sections that are actually part of the state trail that are intact that make up the difference in the middle. But that's it. Our signage is interpretive signage even is the same throughout, so that you're in a special place, so to speak, and you really are. But we want to make sure that in some ways it's like a national park, but it isn't a national park. But that's the beauty of being in a scenic area, is that there's some thematic sign program, and that we've been able to climb on board with that and really push it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Okay, Melissa, any more questions, or do you think?
We do. We have a couple more. This next one is, are you aware of any state DOTs that have adopted the NCHRP report as part of their standards?
I am not aware. Tony, are you aware? That would be completely awesome, and that would be one of the highlights of my career, really. I am not aware of any. Anybody else on the panel aware?
No, Camilla, I'm not aware of any. And I think there is that complication, of course, with the specific examples and the ongoing work on MASH standards. So, but I'm not aware of any at this point. But that's the beauty of the program. It's out there for people to grab off the shelf.
Yep. That's it exactly.
And we have another one. Has anyone experienced cost or budget-based resistance to these designs? And if so, how were they resolved?
I don't think we encountered anything in our case studies. Bob, how about you, or?
Well, for the most part, we've done retrofits on National Register eligible bridges. Not to say that every historical bridge is historic, and that's not the case. And what do you do when so you have to make some decisions when you're say retrofitting railing on an old bridge. Is the bridge register eligible, or is the railing a contributing feature? If the bridge isn't register eligible, well, then it's a different story. But so you know, in the best of all worlds, it'd be fun to retrofit all the old bridges and put recreation of the historic style rail on in the stealth form. That's, you know, that's not prudent. But you know, for the instance, the Oregon City Arch, if we'd done something else, we would have had an adverse effect on the resource. And you know, and there was a lot going on that bridge. In this case at Chenoweth, you know, that was, we never encountered the potential of an adverse effect on an NHL district, and that's just a no-no. That dooms the project. But we still needed to replace the bridge, and you know, so we got our heads together and we found our balanced solution. So it cost more, but you know, it's the cost of doing business, I guess. That's not really a good way to frame it, but the department was willing to budget for a stealth rail rather than a standard freeway rail on that bridge. So it's all about conversations, I think, too. You know, we're all in this together. We're not siloed. You may be siloed in the sense of I'm a historian and someone else is an engineer, but we're all looking out for our agency's roadways, transportation network, and in this case, road bridges. So,
well, and hopefully this report with a lot of all the railing options that have been accepted in various states will help in that regard, you know, to give you kind of a library of railing that, you know, might work for new bridges that might be sympathetic, and you won't have to spend the money to, you know, think about that and design. And, you know, the more of these that get done and get tested with the MASH criteria, then even better. It should help that issue tremendously.
We went into Chenoweth really naive. It was being very naive about some of this, because we said to our bridge engineers, well, you have the exact same rail on the South Umpqua River Bridge. Can't you just reuse it? You don't have to do a new design and all that. Well, we didn't understand that, you know, the new bridge is wider. There are other considerations. We have the geometry of the bridge, the design speeds, all those things are different. It just was not, it was apples and oranges. But we still wanted that railing was the inspiration for us. So we ended up having to design a rail for a new bridge. And that's nice because we had never done that before. I mean, we'd always focused on working on old bridges. In fact, we have a program that received a National Trust Honor Award in 2005 for its long-term care for bridges all over the state, mainly on the Coast Highway, older bridges. But it's the same engineers who took the challenge to design a compatible rail for a new bridge, and you know, that's it. It's the same designers, and they're up for the challenge, and that's so good. And we can take what we learned about retrofitting old bridges and to new bridges, where we have to find a design that's compatible with the historic district or with whatever else it may be. So that's why the ODOT Stealth Rail, which started out for historic bridges, is really for any bridge if there's a situation that needs it. So.
Yep, that's awesome.
Camilla, this is Junior. Can I add one more thing?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list on this slide, and as I mentioned, the crash test is expensive, it's time consuming, you know. So I think the TTI they released a report. So you can use that report to evaluate the existing bridge railings, try to meet the MASH criteria. You know, we call the equivalent MASH complaint bridge railings. I think I've actually realized that it's not possible to use you know, crash test railings for all projects. So there is several ways to handle this. Like Rob said, I think you know, communication, conversations is a key. You know, we always can find something to meet the project requirement. Like the one on the, I just gave you a little bit more information. The modified Kansas crawl, like a 27 inches. We used this before, but now we have a little bit issues because we use 31 inches Midwest guardrail system. So the guardrail is higher than this. So it's unless you don't need, you talk to traffic engineer, there's no need for guardrail at the, at the approaches on the bridge. So otherwise, you need a transition to, from the bridge to the guardrail, 31 inches guardrail. So this is some consideration. Like Kansas Curve 32 inches. Some states that don't allow use this at the edge of the deck. You can put it in the middle, on the deck in the middle, separate the traffic, but it's not at the edge of the deck because there's no the big opening. There's a big opening, like a 7 feet opening to the post like a 3 feet wide. So the crash test and actually analysis shows, the deck cannot handle that. I think the bridge really can carry the load, but the deck overhead cannot handle the load. So there's a lot of consideration from the structure standpoint. All right. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, Melissa, do we have any more questions?
Those were all of our questions.
Okay, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for having us as part of your conference. We enjoy getting this info out there, and I encourage you to visit that website. Everything's downloadable, the design idea book, practitioner's guide, and check them out and see if they're useful to you in your projects. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Camilla.
Yes, thank you, Bob, Ann, Junie, Tony, thanks for the wonderful introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Tony, this is Melissa. Know if you had any closing remarks that you wanted to make as we wrap up this panel. Not to put you on the spot.
Well, that's okay. I can usually fill airtime with meaningless drivel, but in this case, no. I think our team really said it all, and it really does show the power and importance and application of good research. So thanks to everyone, and thanks for the folks who put some questions forward. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great questions.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And this is Melissa, and I'll just remind everyone that we did record this afternoon's webinar, and we will make sure that the questions that we're still needing to get answered, we get answered, and we'll have that information posted on the committee's website on the AASHTO page, which is transportation.org. And I hope that you'll make time to join us next week when we have a session focused on air quality, climate change, and energy. The registration link for that can also be found on the committee's website at the AASHTO site. And Gail, I do want to make sure that you have an opportunity to say any closing remarks.
Just a big thank you to our panelists. Both panels I thought were very informative and engaging. I hope everyone enjoyed them. And thanks to everyone who listened in this afternoon.
Thanks, Gail.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.